let's introduce our first speaker, who's extremely distinguished, Edward Shapiro. He's partner and vice president at PAR Capital Management, Inc. That's a Boston-based investment management firm. And he's also chairman of Global Eagle Entertainment, well known to all of you, Legend 3 Inc., and the Lumexis Corporation. He's also a director of Sonefi Solutions. He previously served on the board of US Airways and also Web.com. Ed earned his higher degrees from the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School and an MBA from UCLA. And Ed, who's an experienced investor both in airlines and also in media and entertainment, is going to give us an overview of how airlines are using technology to change the passenger experience and what kind of trends we can expect to see in the future. So please join me in welcoming Ed Shapiro.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for getting up early and attending this morning. A special thank you to Alfie and Pam, the Apex and IFSA boards, for providing me this opportunity today to share my perspectives on the IFE&C, or in-flight entertainment and connectivity industry. I'd also like to thank all my friends, colleagues, and I think my parents somewhere here for attending this morning. As Laura said, my day job is that I'm investment manager. I have a investment fund with 3 other partners in Boston called PAR Capital. And I specialize, and I have for my whole career, in the airline and entertainment industries. My perspective on IFE&C has been greatly influenced by the experience that I've had in covering those 2 very different industries. In fact, I used to describe the airline and entertainment industries as completely unrelated, with absolutely nothing in common and no overlap. But that was before I attended my first WAEA conference in Toronto in 2007, and I had the privilege of meeting many of you in this room and starting my journey in learning all about this interesting industry. Frankly, up until that point, I thought of IFE really as just another expense item that the airlines that I invested in had to bear. Maybe a nice thing to have as an international passenger to fill, I guess, 24% of my time. And that release window that the studios kind of squeezed in right in between international theatrical and home video. Before I get to my perspectives on IFE&C, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the airline and media industries and how those might relate to what we all do. As many of you no doubt aware, the airline industry has had a remarkable recovery since 2008. The double whammy of $150 a barrel oil and the Great Recession nearly crippled the worldwide industry. But 5-6 years later, the industry is as strong as it's ever been. Certainly, the recovery has not been uniform. Low-cost carriers and some of the Middle Eastern carriers are growing rapidly and impacting the legacy carriers. But in the United States, consolidation has had a remarkably positive impact on industry profitability, and I now think it is safe to conclude that it's different this time. This will always be a cyclical, capital and labor-intensive industry, highly regulated. But the fact is that now 90% of the US airline passengers are controlled by just 4 carriers. And so we are seeing profitability reach record levels and actually starting to resemble real companies and real industries. I think it was Warren Buffett who had my favorite line about the airline industry, and he said something like, "From a purely capitalistic perspective, someone should have shot Orville down." What other business can you point to that's been around for 60 or 70 years and has net lost money over that period of time? But as I said, things are different this time. And I think what we're seeing in the United States with restructured legacy airlines, established low-cost carriers, and now the new so-called ultra-low-cost carriers, all coexisting and generating generally record profitability, that will serve as a model for the rest of the world. There are a couple of trends I think that are worth keeping your eye on. One is so-called densification, where airlines, really both legacy and low-cost carriers, are taking advantage of new seat technologies to add additional seats, in some cases additional rows, without sacrificing pitch. As you can imagine, this is a very efficient way from a cost perspective to add seats and drive down unit costs. Also, from an IFE perspective, obviously, the more passengers on board a plane, the greater the opportunity for us. Another recent trend, which also has IFE and C implications, is unbundling. Airlines around the world are finding new and creative ways to unbundle their product, which allows them to lower the base fares, which in turn stimulates demand, and then charge passengers for various aspects of the airline experience. Of course, some ultra-low-cost carriers have taken this to an extreme and have created some negative reactions from passengers. But you can't argue with the results in terms of the profitability, and I predict that this trend will continue to accelerate. To date, the vast majority of those fees have been related to bags and booking-related charges. But I believe that that's soon going to move into the in-flight experience, presenting both opportunities and challenges for this industry. The publication Airline Weekly talks about the 3 C's responsible for the current prosperity of the U.S. airline industry: consolidation, capacity cutting, and charging for everything. We will see how quickly the rest of the world follows, but from an IFE and C perspective, it is great to have a healthy and growing customer base, which can now take new aircraft and invest in new products. In terms of the media and entertainment industry, there too, we have an industry that's quite healthy. While the box office revenue is down fairly sharply this year, I would suggest this is nothing more than the normal cyclicality when we have certain titles that fail to resonate in a given year. The TV businesses are strong. Overall viewership remains good. Basic and premium cable networks are increasingly competing with the traditional broadcast networks for the best content. You may have seen the number of Emmy Awards in the last couple of weeks that indicate just how competitive they've become. Digital advertising continues to grow rapidly and take share from traditional media. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, given the growth of digital media consumption. One emerging trend to watch here is the development of something called over-the-top providers, or OTTs, you may hear about. These are being launched to address the so-called cord cutters, or the cord nevers, the millennials, the generation of people who don't see the value associated with a $100 cable or satellite subscription. There's massive investments in high-speed broadband being made and compression, video compression advances. Companies such as Netflix have come from practically nowhere to become among the largest buyers of movie and TV content, and also among the most valuable media companies in the world. Before the end of this year, I think we're likely to see at least 1 or maybe 2 new OTTs launch with very substantial backing. And while this is admittedly a US-centric view, I believe these trends too will continue to spread around the rest of the world. So now let's turn to IFE and C. At some point after Toronto, I concluded that there was a big opportunity in this industry, and I decided to devote the majority of my time focusing on it. So what I'd like to do today is share with you some of what I've learned during this time and how I think about the opportunities that we have as an industry. I look at this industry from really 3 different perspectives: the passenger, the airline, and the content providers. Historically, I think passengers saw IFE as an opportunity to fill some of their time on long international flights, maybe an opportunity to see a movie they might have missed in the theaters, or maybe that their spouses weren't interested in seeing with them at home. But as consumers got used to the various developments, products at home, they increasingly demanded the same experience on the plane. From an airline perspective, difficult to generalize, but I would put them in 3 distinct camps. First, they either viewed IFE as a necessary evil, basically to minimize or avoid passenger complaints and stay competitive. 2, they saw it as an opportunity to differentiate their product and drive market share. Or 3, they were basically low-cost carriers, and they saw IFE as one of the many costs and complexities that legacy airlines had to deal with, which frankly, they didn't need to bother with and were happy about it. The airlines that did utilize IFE have had a great product roadmap to follow, as technologies and products on the ground, including video on demand, high definition, satellite-delivered live television, wireless content delivery, and two-way connectivity. Of course, as everyone in this room knows all too well, everything you do on a plane costs a lot more and takes a lot longer to deploy than it does on the ground. From a studio perspective, my sense is they saw IFE really as a nice, relatively reliable source of additional revenue, but wasn't particularly strategic or as meaningful as some of the larger categories such as theatrical or home video. And the IFE&C industry's role was basically to meet the needs of these 3 different constituencies. So what's changed since Toronto circa 2007? I believe a lot. While the airlines are as focused as ever, and maybe even more than ever, on reducing their costs, there is a new appreciation, I think, for what our industry is able to deliver. Not only has our innovation helped improve the overall airline passenger experience and differentiate what is otherwise a largely commodity product, but we are now in the early stages of enabling new sources of high-margin ancillary revenue and thereby improving the profitability of our customers. So what are the specific technology changes driving this development? I would point to 3 key ones. First, I would argue that the DVR is the single most important change in entertainment since the invention of the remote control. A new generation of consumers expect all content to be available wherever and whenever they want it. I still remember being on a trip with my kids a few years ago and trying to explain to them why they couldn't just push a button in the hotel and see Blue's Clues appear just like they did at home. They looked at me with a blank stare when I tried to explain to them that it's not on right now. To them, that meant I wasn't letting them watch their show. Similarly, the first time we flew on JetBlue and experienced live TV, my son tried to figure out where the fast forward button was. After all this their generation knew was that all content is on demand, came from DVDs and DVRs, but no longer is it acceptable to that generation, and maybe even our generation, to have one program choice and expect everyone in the room to want to watch it at the same time. Secondly, I would point to wireless and the proliferation of very powerful, lightweight, high-capacity two-way devices, which have created an expectation on the part of consumers that not only do they need to access their content anywhere they are, but on their own device. And third, connectivity. I like to think of myself, or maybe pretend, that I'm still relatively young. Yet I think back to the first time I received an email, and then the debate that people were having at the time about why it was that AOL needed to increase their dial-up speeds from 28K to 56K. After all, no one could type that fast. But the fact is, the internet has had a profound impact on everyone's life, and expectations are continuing to increase. Now we are talking about 100 megabyte cable systems and even 1 gigabyte fiber systems to the home. So what do these changes mean to the airlines, their passengers, content providers, and IFE&C industry? I would argue they are providing each constituent with tremendous new growth opportunities that we as an industry need to address. First and foremost, airlines are in the customer service business, and they need to respond to the new demands from their customers. On the one hand, that's a challenge, and it may require them to make investments that they otherwise aren't prepared to make. But on the other hand, they have new opportunities to improve their passenger experience, which ultimately will drive higher market share, higher fares, new sources of ancillary revenue, and maybe even stimulate new travel demand. Secondly, and I think most importantly from the IFE&C perspective, these technological changes are expanding access to a much higher percentage of the 3+ billion annual airline passengers than ever before. Who would have ever thought that the low-cost carriers would almost overnight become major IFE participants? And the more passengers who can consume content and connect, the more opportunities there are for this industry. And finally, I believe there is an enormous untapped opportunity to expand our business by connecting the airline passengers we serve with third parties, which to date have had no reason to be involved in either the IFE or airline industries. Together with our airline customers, we have a very large and valuable audience, which is targeted, affluent, and captive, in the good sense of the word, of course. In this fragmented world we live in of 500 channels, the internet, second, third, and even fourth screens, it is increasingly difficult for advertisers to deliver its message to consumers. But as wireless, in-seat video, and connectivity platforms proliferate, we as an industry are in a great position to help our customers both enhance and differentiate their products, reduce their costs, and generate incremental revenue. And if we do that successfully, we will truly become value-added partners to our customers rather than simply vendors. At the same time, we are all beneficiaries of the continuing growth in air travel, such that in the next few years, we will reach literally billions of consumers a year with our IFE&C products and services. If I'm right, our role will expand to include audience aggregation, and the airline passenger experience will be enhanced by these new participants who will want to access our unique audience. And while I said earlier that technology and business models in the air follow a relatively predictable course from models that are occurring on the ground, the fact is we may even be able to find some areas to actually lead the market. For example, where else on the planet can you gather a few hundred strangers, put them in a relatively small room for several or many hours at a time, charge them for the privilege of doing that, and then control or at least influence what they do and see? We are doing this today, and we're doing it with almost 10 million passengers each and every day. How can anyone not be excited about being part of an industry that's able to do that? So thank you for listening. Have a great show. And with that, I'd be happy to take a few questions. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. And what would the Wright brothers have thought of flying today? Now, who has a question for Ed? Please just hold your paw in the air in a manner so that I, with my fading eyesight, can see you. Anybody? Question? Come on. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. No? No? Do? Come on. I have a question, if no one else has a question. No? But yes, over there, sir. Thank you.
I'm going to wait for the mic.
There's a microphone coming to you, sir.
Andy Rosen, consultant. Audience aggregation is an industry that's owned tightly by companies like Nielsen and companies like Google DoubleClick. They have a lot of clout with the advertisers. If InFlight starts doing that, are they going to get mad?
Great question.
It is a great question, and I don't think so. I think the way I envision this opportunity, this is a very large and unique audience, as I said, that can't be accessed by the traditional means that can be on the ground through surveys, through technology to measure your viewership. We as an industry have that opportunity today, and whether we end up partnering with those companies that do that on the ground to enhance their business or find new ways to expand it, I think of that as really incremental. We are not competing on the ground for audience aggregation. We're doing that with our 3 billion annual passengers.
Now, excitingly, we have time for more questions, actually, for Ed. So if anybody else has a question, do put your hand in the air, because it's great to have questions from the floor. Anybody else? Do you see? Oh, yeah, very good. We have a question just there. Thank you.
Hi, Jay Whitehurst, AT&T. Quick question. I'd like to get your perspective on big data analytics with airlines and airline passengers.
Sure, I'm certainly not an expert in that area. There is a tremendous amount of data that the airlines, the GDSs before them, and all of the bookings that occur online today around the world, and lots of opportunities. My sense is the airline industry is only in the very early phases of figuring out how to monetize that, how to optimize from their own CRM perspective, and potentially with third parties and partners. How this industry and the in-flight entertainment industry follows that and evolves will be somewhat different. The opportunity to collect the same degree of data from the passengers is somewhat different, particularly in the traditional one-way systems where you don't know what passengers are viewing or how long they're viewing it. But as we get to two-way, as we get to wireless, and we have an opportunity to collect this data with our partners, the airlines, I think there are going to be interesting ways to extend the models that are occurring on the ground. But like with entertainment, I think it starts with the airlines themselves and the ground and evolves to the in-flight experience.
And we can take one more question, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
sure.
One more question from the floor, if you have one. Yes, over there. Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to know if you could just elaborate on some third-party businesses you were saying that haven't before been interested in being in the IFENC and airline market. I'm sure we can all imagine some, but I wanted to hear a bit more on that from you, if you would.
Sure. I think when I talk about third parties, it's really ground-based businesses, not travel-related. Obviously, travel-related businesses have a long history, and there's a natural affinity for, say, hotels and rental cars to affiliate with the airlines. But what I'm talking about, my example of the OTTs, so companies like Netflix, like Amazon, and others have made a decision that they are going to be in the video business, the business of delivering video content to consumers. The opportunity to reach this targeted audience that we as an industry serve, not so much for the 2 to 12-hour flight and what can be consumed on board that journey, but what those passengers might be able to do after they get off the plane. What have we been able to display, trial, sample for them where a company may not be able to do that and reach them on the ground. Very competitive, as I said, with all the different channels and screens. And so whether we find exclusive opportunities or non-exclusive opportunities to partner with companies who want to reach our audience, who value what our audience does, so that when they go home and they're going to choose their satellite provider, their cable TV, their cell phone subscription plan, we can help promote and sample those opportunities in a way that I think really other industries can't, where there's so much competition and so much noise for that consumer's scarce attention.
Ed Shapiro, thank you so much for that presentation and for answering those questions so well. That was
Thank you all.
terrific.